Shortly before I was ordained a priest, I had a conversation, probably more like an argument, with a cousin of mine. Now, this cousin was my confirmation sponsor, and I always thought we had somewhat the same ideas. And yet, the argument was about my becoming a priest. For him, it didn't fit. He thought, was smart, I was ambitious, I could do anything that I wanted and probably succeed with it. And the priesthood would just throw all of that away. That somehow it wasn't enough for me, and I should strive for something more. I thought about that as I was meditating over the readings today. What does our belief in Christ mean for us practically? If we've followed St. Paul, the second reading that usually doesn't get talked about in sermons, over the past several weeks, he's been trying to tell us that our belief in the death and resurrection of Jesus should mean something. It shouldn't be something that's just sort of in our ears on up that we think about, something that is sort of a nice idea, but it's something that ought to mean something for us in our hearts, in the way we look at things, in the way we act, in the lives we lead. The resurrection of Jesus ought to mean something. And as we ask ourselves, what ought it mean? We hear today's gospel. We love to talk about St. Matthew's Sermon on the Mount, and it's sort of nice and out there. Blessed are those poor. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for justice. Blessed are the poor in spirit. We can sort of have a little bit of wiggle room with Matthew's Sermon on the Mount. Matthew's telling of the Beatitudes. But Luke, we don't talk about as much, and Luke is a whole lot harder. Blessed are you who are poor. Blessed are you who weep now. Blessed are you when they talk against you for my sake. And then even worse, woe to you if you don't do this. A little less comfortable, a little more getting to us right where we live. And what I think Luke is trying to say is precisely what it means to live that transfigured life that Paul is talking about. And it's a life that demands contradiction. Because if we truly believe in Jesus, and if we believe in the way of life Christ calls us to, we are very different from the self-centered nature that an awful lot of people seem to enjoy. We do not strive after wealth. We do not try to be self-satisfied in ourselves. We do not try to be the center of attention all the time. If we live that life that Paul and Luke are talking about, it is the other who is first. It is the other who demands attention. It is the other who ought to be the center of our lives. And it's easy, I think, to take this gospel and to sort of divide the world in half. Those who are self-centered and those who are like me, wonderful people who love all folk. But I think that there's another depth to today's gospel. And that is not that we can divide the world in half, but we can divide ourselves in half. The part of us who understands the gospel, the part of us who knows what Christ is calling us to, and the other part of us who says, maybe I can fudge a little. Maybe I can talk a good talk, but still have all of those things I want. Maybe I can talk about my love for the neighbor, and I show my love for my neighbor when it's convenient for me. Perhaps the real discussion that Luke is trying to get us to move into is not the argument between me and my cousin, not the argument between us good people and those others, but the argument within myself. Do I truly believe what Paul is saying? Do I truly believe what Luke is saying? And how do I show it in my life? How do I show it in the way I treat my family? How do I show it in the way I treat my friends? How do I show it in the way I treat those who may mean nothing to me? How do I live the transformed life with integrity, with honesty, with authenticity? I think for many of us, that's always, I know myself, going to be a struggle. And yet, I think it's a struggle well worth it. Because if we don't engage in that struggle, then Paul is right. We are pitiful people indeed. But if we allow ourselves that struggle with ourselves, if we allow ourselves to try to really discover what it means to be transformed in Christ, what it means to follow those Beatitudes, then those words of Matthew, those words of Luke become important to us. We will be blessed indeed.